So, wow, what an incredible array of speakers that we have had this morning. I hope that you've received so much needed spiritual food and hope. You know, one of the fathers of the continent, you know, he said one time, a long time ago, he said, hope is being able to see that there is light despite all of the darkness. Ladies and gentlemen, please, I want you to put your hands together, right? And welcome to the ILGA World Conference of 2024. My auntie, the Reverend Canon Mpho Tutu van Furth, the founding executive director of the Desmond Tutu Legacy Foundation. Please make her feel welcome to the ILGA World stage.
Good morning and welcome. So it doesn't matter whether you came from halfway around the world or just around the corner, welcome, you are home. Africa is the cradle of humanity. It is our home. It is such a joy and a privilege to be here with you this morning. And I know that we are living in really challenging times, that LGBTQIA+ rights are being challenged across the globe. Here in South Africa, I know we have an amazing constitution that guarantees rights and protections of LGBTQIA+ individuals. It protects us from the discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. But we know also that those rights exist on paper, and they don't always exist as the lived experience of people in our land and in our neighborhoods. And I know that that is true not only in Africa, but around the world. The guarantees that we have on paper and the lived experience don't always match up. We know that recently studies and surveys have been showing a really troubling trend around the world, that increasingly numbers of young people are indifferent to or even opposed to rights for LGBTQIA+ people. And the shift is multifaceted. On the one hand, there's a sense of complacency among those, especially in Europe and in the Americas, who live in relatively accepting societies. They seem to take these rights for granted and feel that the battle for equality is over and it's won. But you know, complacency is a kind of drugged drowsiness. When we walk around assuming that what has been won will always be ours, that we find that those wins are challenged, or they're eroded, or they're ignored. And let me tell you that complacency is not just the domain of the young, because remember 30 years ago, after decades of an anti-apartheid struggle, South Africa celebrated its first democratic elections, and people of every race stood in day-long lines to cast their ballots. Mandela's ANC won handily, and the vast majority of South Africans were elated. We said, oh, our team won, yay! And the international community was elated. And so rather than having to assess a plethora of liberation movements and civic organizations, international donors could send their support to the sole legitimate representative of South Africa's aspirations, which was the new government. And in South Africa, we swallowed that sweet syrup of complacency. Justice had won, justice was done, everything was beautiful in the best of all possible worlds. We treated democracy as a spectator sport. Our ballot was the ticket to the game. Cast your vote and watch the government of the day do the best for you. But democracy is not a spectator sport, and your ballot is not a ticket to snooze in the stands. Your ballot is a permission slip that allows you to hold your elected representatives to account. Here in South Africa, we have woken up to the need to spit out that sedative drug of complacency and demand the rights that had been so hard won. And our most recent elections were maybe a coming of age, awakening to our own complacency. So we now have a government of national unity. The ANC does remain the largest coalition partner, but they can't have it all their own way. It took us 30 years to wake up from that slumber of complacency, and I pray that we stay awake to respond to that deafening wake-up call for our own rights. Complacency isn't the only challenge to our rights. The growing indifference among young people is part of a larger trend of hostility towards minority rights across Europe, across the Americas. There's a noticeable shift towards more conservative parties and governments. There's a resurgence of conservative and nationalist ideologies that oppose minority rights, including those of the LGBTQIA+ communities. Although I must say that conservative sounds to me like a misnomer. I'm more inclined to name them preservative ideologies. Because, you know, conservative, it sounds so benign. We want to conserve precious resources. We want to keep them available for future use. A preservative is like that red dye that we just took out from our food chain, because that stuff is deadly. It is as toxic and as carcinogenic as some of the right-wing ideologies that challenge the progress that has been made in recent decades towards full inclusion and access to opportunity for all people. Preservative values want to maintain every unjust status quo. Preservative values play up xenophobia, blaming the immigrants for the woes of our governments. Preservative values want to keep women in the kitchen and hide those with disabilities in the attic. Preservative values want to discriminate, to decimate climate policy. Preservative values make stuff look fresh, good, and healthy, while it's warmed over supremacist ideas that are just killing us. It is a valid critique of our LGBTQIA rights movement that we have a sometimes narrow focus on issues of sexuality and gender identity to the exclusion of other intersectional concerns. So while the fight for marriage equality, anti-discrimination laws, and the right to gender identities is crucial, we must also recognize that LGBTQIA+ individuals also belong to other marginalized groups. Issues of race, class, physical ability, and religion intersect with those of sexual orientation and gender identity, creating unique challenges that must be addressed holistically. For instance, LGBTQIA plus people of color face compounded discrimination, experiencing prejudice not only for their sexual orientation or gender identity, but also for their race. Similarly, LGBTQIA plus individuals with disabilities encounter barriers that are both physical and societal. So therefore, our advocacy must be intersectional, acknowledging and addressing the multifaceted nature of discrimination and oppression. And another significant challenge we face is that of the ambivalence of the religious community towards LGBTQIA plus rights. In many parts of the world, religion still plays a significant role in shaping social values and norms. And while some religious groups have embraced LGBTQIA plus individuals and championed our rights, others remain hesitant or openly hostile. I am a priest in a denomination that only recently, in my lifetime, and I say recently, but you know, I'm a couple of years older than some of you, but only recently admitted women to ordained priestly ministry. I'm an Episcopal priest, a priest in the American branch of the Anglican Church. And I served for some years with great joy in the South African church in which my father served. And then I met and married the love of my life. And because Marceline is a woman, and also she's Dutch, because God has a warped sense of humor. I suddenly faced a wall of injustice that I had known and noticed, but that I had not felt. I had crossed into the land of the last taboo. For some reason, the Anglican Church of my childhood has embraced the fiction that we can legislate love. My license to officiate was revoked, and I could no longer exercise my priestly ministry in my motherland. I serve now in a congregation that offers a gracious yes to every person that Jesus would welcome to his banquet table. And that means every person. All Saints Amsterdam meets, ironically, in Freiburg, which was the church that was the first in the world to solemnize a same-sex relationship. Though my natal denomination did and still does question the compatibility of my sexual orientation with my faith, that's never been a question for me. I worship a Christ who was on the cutting edge of upending injustice. It would be disingenuous for a priest to proclaim that God is anti-racist, anti-imperialist, anti-patriarchal, and opposed to oppression in every form, only to assert that that same God supports the oppression or exclusion of gender and sexual minorities. It's also important for us to acknowledge that the LGBTQIA plus community has, in many instances, ceded the territory of spirituality to the right. We've allowed them to remake God in their image, a pint-sized God who fits into their back pockets, a God who is stern, serious, straight-laced, and probably a bearded old white man. But doesn't that just seem so inconsistent with the image of God that we see with our own eyes? Just look at the world that God has created. Tell me, how many shades of green do you need to paint a tree? Thousands of leaves, and every one of them different. Why bother to make each snowflake or stone unique. For what do we even need so many shades of blue for the sky? Do you mean that the God who created a universe that is so wildly and wonderfully beautiful, so amazingly diverse, do you think that God would shrink to fit into the pinched joylessness of preservative religion? Do you think that God would fit into the version of religion that says love can only travel in this narrow, proscribed, pitiless channel? God just looks at that and laughs. Because every cup we set out to catch God's love just overflows. God's love overflows. God's love overflows in joy, in compassion, in mercy, in beauty, in generosity, in diversity. God's love overflows into the beauty of you. All, each and all of you. The seeding of spiritual territory has allowed those preservative religious factions to dominate the narrative around morality and ethics. We must reclaim that space. We must reclaim the space for spirituality and faith, provide a strong foundation for advocacy and support, and offer a sense of belonging and acceptance that transcends social prejudices. Okay, spirituality doesn't mean that you have to go to church, although All Saints Amsterdam would welcome you. It doesn't even mean that you have to believe in God, although God would welcome you. But it does mean that you have to keep finding ways to feed your soul so that you're strong enough to face the struggle ahead. It does mean that you have to build community so that you have companions at your side to halve your pain and double your joy. It does mean that you must find or create rituals that you can lean into when the world around you seems to crumble. So where do we go from here? The challenges are significant, but they're not insurmountable. We can continue to educate young people about the history and importance of LGBTQIA+. We must keep retelling the story of who we are and the depths of history from where we come. We must educate ourselves about the story of LGBTQIA+ advocacy. We also need to know the story of our own community. And our advocacy must be inclusive and intersectional. We need to address the unique challenges faced by LGBTQIA+ individuals who also belong to other marginalized groups. And this means listening to and amplifying the voices of those who are often sidelined within the movement. And I know, yeah, that is self-serving as a Black bisexual African woman of a certain age, who is not a native speaker of the place and is a migrant of the place where she now lives. It seems like I'm determined to kind of pile up roadblocks on my path to success. But as we say, we know that the fight for LGBTQIA+ rights is far from over. Still, we must celebrate our progress and our wins, and we must retell and mourn our losses. We must gather spiritual sustenance for the journey ahead, and we must unite across our multiple identities to speak up for justice. Together, we can strengthen legal protections, build supportive communities, we can continue to advance the cause of equality and human dignity. Kwa umoja, united, we rise.